Hey everyone, so today we'll be installing a upgraded motherboard into my HP EliteBook 840 G1. Now, if you didn't see already, I already installed a 1080p display in here, so I replaced the 720p display with a 1080p display, and this display is out of a G3 840. If you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and click on the tag above. But this is a 840 G1 with an Intel i5 4300U. So we're going to go ahead and install a motherboard from our EliteBook 840 G2, which is right here, install it into our G1. And there's a couple differences between the motherboard, and that is the upgraded processor. This is a i5 5300U. The one in the G1 is an i5 4300U. This the 5300U gives you a little bit more base frequency, but this boost frequency is the same. And then the big reason why we're doing this swap is the dedicated graphics chip. This has an AMD R7 M260X graphics chip in here. There's nothing real exciting about this graphics chip, it's just that it has dedicated graphics. And then prior to installing this, we're going to go ahead and repaste it with some Noctua NTH2 thermal paste. So we're going to start by removing the screws for the heat sinks. I don't know how well it comes out on camera, but there's actually numbers by each one of these screws. I'm assuming this is how you're supposed to tighten the whole heatsink down in a nice even pattern. So I'm gonna use what I know from torquing cylinder heads down and start from the last screw and work my way in. And then obviously when we go ahead and retighten this heatsink, we'll follow the numbers here. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we'll start here at number 6, and we won't back it out fully. Let's do a couple turns and then move on to the next one as to bring the heatsink up evenly. So I've had some time to look over these two boards, and there are differences between these two. So on the bottom here we have the motherboard that came out of the G1. This is the motherboard that came out of the G2. So one item is that the SSD boss, it has a little, the screw hole boss is actually pushed further out in comparison to the G1 board. So if you have an SSD, then you're going to have to take that into consideration. Another kind of a bigger change is that the Wi-Fi cards are different. So the G1 uses this Wi-Fi card, at least mine use this Wi-Fi card, and the G2 board that I have uses this Wi-Fi card. Now, they mount in the same location, meaning that they mount, you know, somewhere around this area, but they use two different style antennas. So the G1 wireless card has, it looks like what, I don't know how to describe it other than just saying that they have bigger diameters for their antenna connection, and then the G2 board has a smaller diameter for its antenna connection. You cannot use this card in your G2 motherboard. There's a slot, no slot fits this, so you have to set that aside. But the good thing about at least my motherboard on the G1 is it included these ancillary antennas, and these antennas are actually the right size to fit on the wireless card, on the Wi-Fi card. The only thing I don't know is its position. There's a position 1, position 2, and mine are labeled 5 and 6. So when I figure out which ones are which, I'll go ahead and put that information in the video. But just something to be mindful of is that the Wi-Fi card is not just a straight swap. You're gonna have to move these cables, these antennas around so that you can have this card essentially positioned here with this set of antennas up here. But that's all the differences on the processor side. All of the connectors and everything, they're all in the right spot. Everything is the same. Now we'll flip it over. So now we're on the back side of the boards. This is the G1 board, this is the G2 board. Everything seems to be the same. These connectors are all the same. Obviously we have our hard drive ports, the I/O. The biggest difference that we have are these connectors here. They're distinguishably different in size. This is what they call, it looks like on here it says the SM board. We can see that this board here is what plugs into that slot, and this is the ribbon cable for it. So this card reader is if you had a work issued ID with a little chip on it, and you'd actually just plug the work ID in there, and that's how it authenticates you and then unlocks the machine. So it seems like the G2 board has a wider ribbon cable, more data being transferred between the two. I'm not really sure. Thankfully, because these G1 and G2s share the same chassis, I was able to find a card reader out of a G2 that also came with the ribbon cable. This is the right size ribbon cable that we need. So here you can see that we have them side by side. The ribbon cables are obviously different widths, but the mounting locations are the same. This connection for your trackpad is the same. The only thing that's interesting is that you get this additional connector here. So I don't really know what that's used for, but we will find out, because I'm gonna go ahead and put this card reader board into this chassis, and then we'll continue with our motherboard swap, and we'll see how everything turns out. I'm pretty optimistic that this is all gonna work. Anyways, let's go ahead, let's get this swapped in. Let's get our motherboard swapped in, plugged in. Let's get our Wi-Fi card going on here. Okay, so I just went ahead and put the back cover on. I didn't screw anything in. I just screwed in the motherboard with the 3 screws. I plugged in the ribbon cables necessary. Obviously there's no keyboard. I plugged the RAM and the hard drive and the battery in. I just want to know if this thing's gonna start up or not. So here we go. Oh, excellent. So we plugged it in. We're getting lights. Doesn't seem like it likes something. Okay. Okay, so let's do take 2 of this. So I don't have a hard drive in here anymore. I have no battery in here either. So we're getting power to the keyboard, which is good. We're getting power everywhere, but it doesn't seem like this is gonna work. Seems like we're gonna have the same issue as we did last time. Oh!
Oh, yes! We have trackpad too. HP EliteBook 840 G2. We have 8 gigs of RAM installed. It seems like processor speed 2.3 gigahertz. Yeah, i5 5300U. Yes. No battery present, but it seems like the memory wasn't seated correctly. I only put one stick in there for right now. Excellent. We have 16 gigs of RAM now. That's awesome. All right, so it looks like just having to, I don't know, plug it in, plug it out. Seems like it fixed it. Man, I am super pumped right now.
So as you can see, the swap was an absolute success. I am very pleased with how everything turned out. And I was actually even more pleased with the fact that I upgraded a laptop. I upgraded the screen, upgraded the motherboard. Most of the time you can just add an SSD, so a faster hard drive and some RAM. But, you know, we're able to fully upgrade this thing, which was pretty neat. So I just want to recap the issues that we had when swapping over the motherboard. First thing I'd want to tell you guys is if you have a M.2 SSD card, the mounting boss for the drive is in a different location on the G2 board in comparison to the G1 board. And then, more importantly, we have the Wi-Fi card, which is a completely different Wi-Fi card on the G2 board, as you saw earlier. So my recommendation to you is if you were to perform this motherboard swap, I would definitely look for a board that comes with a Wi-Fi card. I honestly really lucked out that my board had a Wi-Fi card, so that was a plus for me. I would look for a motherboard that already has a heatsink attached to it. I've seen other G2 motherboards where they sell it to you without the heatsink. I would personally not go with those just because you would then have to source your own heatsink, and it then would most likely drive up the cost of this whole swap if you consider doing it. And the last issue we had was the card reader board being different. So I was really happy to be able to find a G2 card reader board on eBay, and looking at the footage while I was editing it, I believe the reason why it became wider, the ribbon cable became wider, was because of that additional connector that I had called out in the video. So I still don't know what that additional connector is for, but I would believe that that is in fact the reason why the cable became wider. That is the extra data that is getting passed over to the motherboard.
Now, while I don't think anyone thinks I'm lying that I did this swap, but you can clearly see that this now has a i5 5300U, and we have our Radeon R7 M260 graphics chip on here.
So you may be asking yourself, all right, Joe, I really like that you're able to upgrade this laptop, but how much did the upgrades actually cost? Well, I can tell you that the screen cost me approximately $40 from eBay. The motherboard I was also able to get from eBay, and I was able to get that for $76 shipped. The card reader board, I believe, was $16 or $18 shipped. And then you'd also, if you don't have any laying around, you'd also have to factor in some thermal paste. And obviously you need to have an EliteBook 840 G1 as well. I don't think I would recommend doing this swap if you had to purchase an EliteBook G1. If you were gifted it from somebody because it's a relatively old laptop, yeah, I would consider upgrading it and having fun with it and extending the life of the machine. I know in my screen swap video, I had mentioned that I was going to run some benchmarks. I'm actually going to save the benchmarks for the next video in this 3-part series. I really just wanted to go over installing the motherboard and seeing if everything worked and showing you, the people, that yes, in fact, you can take a G2 motherboard and put it in your G1. You can give this thing an added boost with a little bit better processor, but more importantly, a dedicated graphics chip. Let me know if you decide to do this swap on your HP G1 laptop. I'd really like to hear about your swap and how it went, and if you enjoy the upgrade. As always, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it educational, entertaining, and helpful.